We're all excited to have you here. While we're started, go ahead and in the chat box, tell everybody where you're from. And also take a minute to adjust your name and put in your location or your company name so that when we turn cameras on, we can see where everyone is coming from as well. Again, like we mentioned, we're going to go ahead during the presentation, turn all cameras off and mute ourselves. The presentation is finished. Everyone will be asked to turn their cameras on and unmute themselves so they can participate in the discussion. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to ISMTE's board president. Yes.
Okay, thanks, Donna. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Erin Landis. I'm the current ISMTE president. I am also the vice president of publications at the American Gastroenterological Association in Bethesda, Maryland, which is just right outside of Washington, D.C. So I'm glad that you all chose to join us today for our first ISMTE office hours. And I'm just going to briefly kind of explain what the concept is here. So the idea is that this is kind of like a local group, except it's virtual and it's topic focused. So it's really an opportunity for the community of editorial office professionals to get together and talk about a specific topic that you might be facing or you might want to address with your journals in particular. So it's informal, it's meant to be a discussion. It is hosted by an ISMTE member. So in this case, Phaedra has very graciously chosen to be our guinea pig for this and lead us through an interesting discussion about academic social networking sites. So I will also say that this is our first one and we are hopeful that this takes off and that other members of the community want to lead these sessions. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Phaedra.
Thanks so much, Erin, and thanks, Donna, for all your help in coordinating the session today. So as Erin mentioned, we're talking about ResearchGate and academic social networking sites. And just to set expectations, my hope is to give a little bit of a didactic presentation, take you through some of the ins and outs that I've personally dealt with in my role as executive publisher for the Aesthetic Society, and then to offer some, have some discussion, and then kind of see what you all have experienced in this regard as well, so we can learn from one another. These are my disclosures. So when we think about ResearchGate, academic networking, social sites like this, there's so many different facets of it, but I think some of the buzzwords that come to mind for me are the impact that these sites have had on publishing, the loss that we as authors and journal editors experience of our content. There's ethics issues around all of this and legalities as well. As we've all seen, there's many different legal issues right now surrounding, in particular, ResearchGate. But most importantly, I think it's education, and that's what I'm hoping to impart to you today. So again, ResearchGate, I think, is commonly known as one of the most prolific and popular social networking sites, followed closely by academia.edu and Mendeley. So in my mind, I have to ask the question, is there malice when someone uploads their full content article, full-length article to one of these sites, or are they naive? Or is there something kind of in between? So I think, you know, much like we've seen with the predatory publishing, people are taking advantage of it in some regards, and others are really just kind of not in tune with exactly what the rules and regulations are. So I'm hoping that we'll dive a little bit deeper into some of those ins and outs. So copyright breach is essentially when an author uploads the full content article, the published final version, to a site like ResearchGate, whether it's knowingly or not. And at that point, in most cases, so for example, I manage the Aesthetic Surgery Journal, and this would apply for my journal, that is a breach of copyright. It's not permissible because of the copyright and the licenses that are signed by the authors. We'll get a little bit more into that, but what I wanted to preface this part of the talk about is how ResearchGate is filling up its coffers on essentially the hard work and effort that our editorial offices are all doing. And they're getting in touch with us on email. They're encouraging us to do exactly what is not permitted by copyright license, which is to share our content. And we'll get into some of the nuances. For example, it is okay to upload a full content article, full length article to ResearchGate if you're sharing it one-off, an educational sharing of it, just like you would kind of anywhere on email, at a conference, etc. But they're really targeting people. And I'll get into one of these articles that kind of precipitated this talk shortly and share a little bit of those details with you. So this recently published an aesthetic surgery journal called Clever Emails from ResearchGate and encourage authors to breach copyright law. And so the history behind this is I was digging around on ResearchGate looking for disclosures and some other information on one of the authors that is involved as an author in our journal. And I sort of just tripped upon I went down a rabbit hole, honestly, about all of this. And I decided that it was something that I needed to put more time and effort into research to find out really what are the semantics around this. So here's an example in table 1 of some of the things that personally came into my inbox over the last little bit of time. These are the questions that we get. Did Lori Cassis author this publication with you? Phaedra, we think we found two of your full texts online. Here's some research from your network. So they're really pinging us constantly and incessantly, trying to get us to engage and interact with their site. And it takes just a couple of clicks to, whether it's knowingly or unknowingly, breach copyright and upload full contents of articles. So I think there's a fine line between being interested in kind of finding out, well, who cited my research, or, what's the new achievement or the publication achievement that my article has achieved. So you log in and really you sort of start to engage with them. And the more you engage, the more emails you get. And I think you kind of get roped in a little bit to making, in some instances, poor choices. Figure 1 here is also showing, we think we found 2 of your full text online. So there's lots of different catchy ways that they're trying to attract us as editors and authors. Some key highlights here from this editorial talk, this was from the Swanberg Library blog, and they talk about being aware of enemies masquerading as friends, ResearchGate and co. And basically they're saying that ResearchGate is not a friend to academia. And I think if you ask many academics and if you read the blogs and look online, that is the kind of working stance that most academics will have, that sites like this are not really our friends. They're kind of, they're pirating content, and they have this whole business model that's based on taking content illegally away from authors in journals like ours. Let's see here. In the middle, it says, we think we found one of your full text research items. And then since I started to delve into this, ResearchGate has made changes to how you can upload the full contents of your article. And they give you a few instances where they kind of verify, and you have to actually check a box, much like we do in ScholarOne or Editorial Manager, indicating that, yes, I realize I'm uploading this. Yes, I have permission to do it. But much like a lot of things that are, we handle in publishing, not everything is being read, not everything is being sort of thought about in terms of the legalities. So the boxes get checked, the article gets uploaded, and sometimes the authors are none the wiser. And then here at the end, I talk about this one particular article by Thelwall and Kusha, and this was in the Journal of the Association for Information Science and Technology. So this is a Wiley title, and the article was cited 128 times by Crossref. And so one would think that the primary article would be sourceable on the Wiley website, but ResearchGate makes it so much easier to get it free there. And they actually affix, as I'm sure many of you have seen, a front page to your article, which also kind of seems like now they're adapting our work, and that's a whole nother conversation that we can get into. And so for an author or a reader trying to access this particular article, it's much easier and faster for them to get it on ResearchGate, which sort of is not exactly what publishers would like to have happen. So it's 128 times cited in Crossref, and then uploaded by one of the authors, whether, again, inadvertently or not. And then it was read 3,900 times and cited another 303 times. So the metrics and the usage is being taken away from our journals, which, as we know, kind of precipitates advertising and other kinds of metrics and things that we think about and worry about in publishing. So what are the ethics of these kind of issues? So one perfect example here is if someone, and I've seen this on ResearchGate, if they upload what we call in our journal, it's an Oxford journal, the advanced access article, this is an accepted manuscript. So it's the accepted version. It has a watermark that says accepted manuscript. So I've seen these uploaded into sites like ResearchGate. And essentially, if that person who uploads it doesn't go back and correct it with the final version, which these are two different articles, but it's a screenshot of what a final version would look like, there's a lot of potential issues. Version control is the obvious example, patient safety issues in our space, which is plastic surgery, because we know that from the accepted version to the published version, there could be a lot of changes that the editorial office makes, that the authors make, and that could have consequences in patient safety, which is significant. And then also staff resourcing issues. Are we police women and men? Are we supposed to sit there taking our time and our staff resources to be checking sites like this to make sure that our content is not being pirated? So how do we protect our content? And, this is a little campy. I've put a few kind of quotes in here, but basically I think the best thing to do is to just be wary of whether you happen upon on one of these sites your own content from your journals, whether you as an author have written something, published it, you or your co-author should not be uploading it to ResearchGate. It's really just kind of straightforward like that. If you sign a license and that is owned by, whether it's your society, the publisher, etc., even open access licenses. People think, well, it's open access, it's free, I can do whatever I want. Really, that's just not the case, unfortunately. Linking to these full-length articles is perfectly permissible and fine, but uploading it and making it freely accessible really does negate all of the hard work and the financial investment that's made by the publisher and all of the work and the content that authors are providing to us. So again, what inspired this research was really sort of happening upon one of these authors for our journal and realizing that several of this particular author's articles were uploaded and available. Also, it kind of made us go down, do an audit essentially of our license and how does our instructions for authors read versus what the actual license language reads when we're sending it to authors. And what we found, unfortunately, was there was some inconsistent language. So we had to go back and actually involve the legal team at Oxford and on our end as well to make sure that we reconciled that. So what we were saying on the website matched what we're asking authors to sign. So if that's not something that you've taken a look at it in your roles recently, I do highly recommend it. You might, like I did, find that it's not exactly as succinct as it should be and not clear. And that could cause caveats and other questions for authors who already kind of, they're practicing physicians and they're in other fields. They're not publishing experts like we are, so they don't know all of the ins and outs of copyright law. And then again, is it consistent in all of your content? So what should authors do? As an author, if you find that your article has been uploaded, you can simply go into ResearchGate and take it down. You can store a copy of that article, and when someone emails you saying they're interested in your research, by all means share that. And I think that's great, and that's how science and medicine evolve. That's wonderful educationally. But to have the full PDF out there is not permissible. And as editors, again, do we have the staffing resources to be policing this? Probably not. But if you're on one of these sites and you happen upon an article, it's pretty easy to kind of do a search for your journal and, maybe kind of take down a list of articles that you see that are up there illegally. And then, the best advice would be to contact the publisher. And so the publisher then would step in and they can issue takedown notices. So this is essentially the publisher contacts the author. And again, if you have a personal relationship with this author, you might want to write to them first and say, hey, did you realize this is up there? In most of the cases where I've done that, the authors have not been aware that it was even up there. So my sense is that it's more naivete than malice. And I do give people the benefit of the doubt, but nevertheless, it does need to come down. So again, performing regular audits to the extent you have the staff to do that, writing to your authors personally, looping in the publisher, and then contacting your legal department if there's something that's too nuanced and it's kind of out of the ordinary, or someone fights you about it and says that they feel that it should be up there. So I think we've all got legal contacts that we can loop in to help us there. This is one of the most valuable sites that I've come across when it comes to how and where and why can you share a particular article. Howcanishare.com. You literally pop the DOI of the article that you potentially want to share right into this box, and then it'll tell you what your rights are, which sites it can be shared on, how it can be shared full length, PDF, abstract, etc. So I have found this incredibly valuable, and I do recommend that if you're in doubt, pop in the DOI, and this is a great resource. So I was hoping at this point, then, we can talk about the experiences that those of you on the call have had in this regard, how you might have managed it. Have you set policies? I don't want to turn this into an ISMTE listserv discussion, but I think it really kind of is like that, but in real life. And I'm also interested to hear how you've navigated this, and have you created a formal policy? Do you have some particular experience that you'd like to share? So I guess you could pop that into the chat box, and Donna can work with us to answer questions, or to kind of turn your, to unmute you. And I appreciate your time and listening and coming to join today on this topic. We have a couple polls that Donna is going to launch, I guess, shortly. And I look forward to answering questions and to hearing what your experience has been. Thank you.
Thanks, Phaedra. Do you want me to go ahead and launch that first poll?
Yeah, sure. That'd be great.
I think we can turn our cameras on now, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So we're really trying to get a sense in this poll of whether you've actually, if you've served as an author, have you uploaded full contents? And there are a few subsequent questions, and there's no judgment in the room. We're really just trying to get a sense of if you've done it, if you kind of realize that it was, something that was potentially an issue. And I see we've got 87% of you have voted, so that's great. It's looking like the majority of or everyone so far has said no. Which is great. Okay, 100%, that's great. So 100% of you have said that you have never uploaded your full text article. So that's great. Donna, can we do the follow-up question? And I'm going to poke into the chat box here while we're doing that.
All right, I launched that next one.
Okay. Quite a group here, lots of different journals, and thanks to everyone for coming. So again, if anyone, has had a particular experience that they'd like to share, I'd love to have anyone pop in. Otherwise, maybe some combination of Erin and Donna and I can chat a little bit more until we, hit upon a topic that.
Well, I was just going to say thank you, Phaedra, for that. It was really interesting. You shared a lot of information that I didn't know. I'll just say, kind of just to kickstart the conversation, I don't know a whole lot about these sites. One of the questions I was going to pose to the group is, how familiar are you all with these sites, and do you know how they differ from, ResearchGate versus academia.edu and Mendeley? And I'll also just say, the most experience I've had with this is Elsevier. We're published in partnership with Elsevier, and they, on our behalf, have audited ResearchGate for our content. And then they were, locked in some litigation with ResearchGate on behalf of their society partners. So that's kind of the extent of the experience I have with this. So I'm curious to hear what others' experiences are.
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested to hear that Elsevier kind of took that on their own, and I think every publisher probably has a different approach. So I think that's a nice value add that they did that sort of for you. I feel like we've happened upon articles and kind of contacted either the authors or the publisher, and then they'll get involved. But again, it's none of us really have the time. It looks like here, 87% of people said they've never kind of taken a look to see what content might be on there. And I think if we walk away from this session with one little nugget, it might be take a look and kind of just see what's out there, because everything that's out there is taking away from all of the valuable metrics and data that our journals are gaining.
I can see that taking up a ton of staff time though. So it's like, you
know.
know, dipping your foot into the water, you don't know how deep it's going to be. And it seems a little scary. So I feel like I'm going to think about this, but cautiously.
I know. I mean, Michelle, it absolutely, and that's kind of how I ended up here today, because I dipped a toe in to look for one little thing and just went down this rabbit hole. And, you know, it's kind of mind boggling. And one of the other little things that I discovered is that someone can upload your article, even if they're not even at all related, not an author, et cetera. And I had an example of that that I happened upon on one of the ResearchGate listservs. So, you know, I could take your article, Michelle, and I could upload it. And if, you know, I don't know how you would even get a notification that I'd done that. So there's like all these second and third and fourth party things that can be happening, none of which we're aware of. And yet they're spamming us all the time with, you know, with emails and trying to engage with us and get our content. So it's a big time suck. And I think it wouldn't be easy, but you know, that's why there's a lot of lawsuits.
I had a question sort of related to that. You said 87% said they've never checked, and I'm happy to admit that I'm one of those. So for those that have checked, is there a standard process or frequency with you do that? Or is it just sort of like a one-off? You happen to get on there and check it out at one point and that was the extent of it? Just kind of curious about what people do for that.
So it's a good question. We'll see if anyone wants to chime in. I sort of, when I've gone onto ResearchGate, it's been for a specific reason. And I'm looking for whether it's an author or an article or something that gives me pause. Let me go check this out. And then it kind of goes from there. But I would think that you could search by, and looks like Megan is raising her hand. You could search by your journal or maybe even by topic. You know, if I put in plastic surgery and then a litany of articles come up, I could potentially, but again, as Michelle said, it's incredibly time consuming.
I answered the poll as no, I had never gone to check on ResearchGate, but I just did right now. And in about 30 seconds, I just typed in my journal's name and a whole list of things came up, including an article my editor and I wrote a few years ago. So now I have to go deal with that.
And seeing the full PDF, right?
I'm just, it does, yep. It says you can request full access.
Okay, if it says you can request full access, that means the PDF is stored. So I could write to you and say, hey, Megan, can I have your article? And then we're DMing or emailing each other. That's okay. If it's, but you'll see that there is a differentiator between that and when it's just fully available and you just click download and lock and load.
Sure, I'll go click on a few others and see if I find any of those PDFs then.
But that's good. It took a few seconds and you at least came my way with a few things to check out.
Yeah, and I didn't have to log in. I just scrolled down and typed in my journal name and there was a keyword search too. Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
So Phaedra, are you aware, or is anyone else on the call aware of, is one of these sites or more reputable than others? I know ResearchGate really came under a lot of fire, but Mendeley, for example, was purchased, I believe, by Elsevier. So I'm not sure if, you know, some of these are just more above board than others. Does anyone know that?
So my impression, Erin, is, you know, again, I sort of liken this to predatory publishing. If you're there, you're there. You might be a little less predatory, but, you know, I think the degrees don't really matter. I think Mendeley is a little bit of a different issue where they have some better reputational relationships, like you said, with Elsevier. And I know kind of, if you think about Altmetric, they're kind of, they're denoted by Altmetric in their score. To me, I think ResearchGate is the, you know, is the leader in this. And I think they are, you know, really savvy when it comes to SEO and kind of just, you know, really targeting people. And I think that's their business model. So I think academia.u is considered the close second, but I'm definitely interested in hearing what others have experienced.
The other question I had too was, is anyone aware of the authors or editors that they work with using these sites? I mean, I know you reported, Phaedra, that among the research community, ResearchGate is seen not positively, but I wonder if anyone has any experience with the scholars they work with using these sites. I would wager to guess that our editors have no idea that they even exist, but
And I think in our space, our editors are aware, but only because we've kind of caught authors who have, uploaded their articles, and then it's on the landscape, but I don't think that they're spending their time sort of, looking around. And I also kind of think if you have a list of 5 or 10 authors, you've got the senior person who probably blesses it, but maybe didn't do most of the work. You've got the trainee who's the lead author, et cetera. They might be so excited to kind of share it everywhere, and maybe they're not, as adept at the nuances of publishing, and they upload it. That senior author might never know. And the junior author might think it's okay. So I think, again, education here and just kind of putting out there that once a license is signed, and assuming it's similar to our journal where the copyright is owned either by the society or the compiled issue proof, as they say, is owned by the publisher or the society, that it can't be done that way. And I think this is part of a broader conversation about licenses and copyrights. I don't know if anyone wants to kind of talk about, or if anyone has an example of an issue where they've had some tricky time kind of dealing with a copyright issue. Illustrations is one area where that would apply to us. We have many articles where there are illustrations included, and the illustrator wants to own the copyright, and we've gone back and forth with legal. So it kind of dovetails into a little bit of the art and illustration world, but I think it's all still under licensing. And then, what kind of attribution is given? Can it be repurposed? So does anyone have a journal that's image heavy where they've dealt with illustrator issues or any kind of copyright around that?
We do have illustrators, but they are on staff, and what they create is, we own it, so that hasn't been too much of an issue for us.
Oh.
We have Wiley as our publisher, and we just throw and a publications director of the society. So anything weird, I just throw to somebody else.
Yeah, and this might be something, Erin, for the next meeting for the society to think about, if this is a topic where a lot of us have interest in learning more, maybe don't know as much as we should, whether we kind of have someone who's, from a legal perspective come in and talk to us about it. I mean, I think having some foundational information is good, but the nuances can be so interesting in this space.
Definitely. The other thought I had too, as you were giving your presentation, Phaedra, was what responsibility do we as editorial office professionals bear in educating our authors about these sites and how to use them responsibly, if any? And how could we do that? I guess I'm curious to hear if anyone does educate their authors on these, and if so, how, or what ideas do you have for how we might do that?
That's a great question. Donna, could we launch the next poll while we're contemplating that one? Perfect, thank you. So I think it wouldn't be too difficult during, hopefully we'll all be traveling again very soon, during an editorial board meeting I know they're very tight on time generally, but I think if we devoted a couple of slides to something like this, just to raise awareness about it, it could be helpful. And it looks like Kwanzaa Sarah is wanting to chat with us. Can we unmute her? Let's see. Oh, there we go. Did you want to
Yeah, you can ask your question.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I recently had an article that we're editing, and it's scheduled for an issue, and it had been published elsewhere in its original form. And of course, it's a much better article now. the site that I landed on, I believe, was owned by Wiley. And I think there was language in there, and it's just kind of like, I'm going, is this a legitimate site or not? Does Wiley own the copyright now? And are we going to have to ask them to obtain copyright? There was language in there as to the authors being responsible for going in and updating where the published PDF is and everything. But we do have images and everything that, you know, we're proud that we're publishing them first and everything. So what do you do in an instance where it's already accepted and you find out? Do you go ahead and publish it? Do you make sure all of that happens before publication?
So thanks for the question. I was trying to follow it. So it was accepted previously at a different journal and then it came to you, is that right?
No, I believe it's just one of these sites where you can upload your manuscript.
So the author uploaded it there and then sent it to you for peer review. You accepted it and published it, but now there's two different versions.
Correct.
Okay, right. So, I mean, the author might think that that falls under the preprint umbrella, that they have the right to do that. But if they also then check the box in Scholar One or EM saying, no, this has not been previously published elsewhere, I would argue that that's not correct or true at that point. So,
Correct.
I mean, my instinct would be to write to the author and say, you've signed a license with us and, you know, this is the version of record that'll publish on the Wiley website. And could you please take that prior version down because it's now out of date or, you know, defunct if it's
Okay.
version. That's my advice.
But you would go ahead and publish it since it has been through peer review, it has been edited, and it's ready for publication.
So I think what I would do is have the conversation first with the author and ask them to take it down. Make sure your editor-in-chief is aware that this has all happened and make sure he's on board. And if he's good to go, the article comes down and, you know, it'll remain down, the prior version, then I don't see any reason to not publish it. But again, I would loop in your editor and make sure he's okay with that.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that.
Of course, very much.
I have a question about that. Was it the original version published on a preprint server, like one of the ones that, you know, bioarchive or medRxiv, you know, one of the ones that kind of exist and are pretty, you know, more and more commonplace? Or was it just on some, you know, repository somewhere or someone's blog site or something?
Sounded like she said it was on one of these ResearchGate type sites.
Okay.
Yeah, it was posted at, it wasn't ResearchGate, but it was a preprint site.
Well, that's different then. If it's a preprint site, so our journal's policy is we will publish things that are previously published on a preprint site, but we need to be notified at the time of submission that that's the case. Do you have a policy like that at your journal?
All we do is say, have you ever submitted this elsewhere? So this is language that I need to work on for the author instructions.
Yeah, and also
because it's not explicitly stated, don't do this.
Well, and again, you may or may not decide preprint publication prior to submission to your journal is okay. That's a policy that you and your team and editor need to decide on. We decided that, you know, preprint servers are, you know, for better or worse, prolific now, and we'd be, you know, castigating a lot of content and potential submissions if we made that a hard no. So we said it's okay, but we just want to know that you've done it. So that's our position. But again, I think it's a discussion that you can have with your team.
Okay.
Yeah. The other thing that this reminds me of is one of the things that we changed is we added language in our license form and also on our instructions for authors. And I can pull it and let me see if I can do that now and share it with you all. We added language basically calling out sites like ResearchGate and academia.u saying, if you sign this license, you do not have permission. And again, to the extent they read it and, you know, and they're not just checking the box, but at least it gives you something that you can go back to and say, hey, you know, you said here that you wouldn't do this. You've now done it. And then, you know, most of these conversations end up to be fairly friendly, just they take it down and all ends well. But if not, then at least it's something that you can kind of point to.
Well, especially if they don't even know if their paper has been uploaded somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Or by whom. I'm trying to pull my guidelines
Helen
here.
has a question or a comment.
So we run the Authenticate reports, every paper that's submitted, the Authenticate runs, and quite often lately I'm getting 85% or whatever, and I look and it's uploaded on a preprint server. So in that sense, we are notified because I check every single Authenticate report. So I'm just wondering, I'll bring this up with the team because maybe we do need to have them physically notify us as well. But I was just wondering if the Authenticate report is good enough to make that, like if it's a high Authenticate, I click on the link and I go look at it.
It's an interesting point. I think the more places you have it, the better. I'm pulling up on our website here. This is the instructions for my journal. And we're saying here that the published journal cannot be shared publicly, for example, on ResearchGate, academia, or other social academic networking sites to ensure the sustainability of peer-reviewed research and journal publications. So this was language we came to in concert with our publisher. And I can put this into the chat box. And this also now appears as a result of kind of the research that took me down the rabbit hole on the license form. So we have it here and we have it there. You're saying that you're finding it in Authenticate and the reports. 85% is a really high threshold. I'm curious here, can we maybe throw into the chat box what our journal standard threshold is? I'm just curious to see what everyone is sort of, do you do a kind of desk reject after X percentage, or at 85%, are you, I'm assuming you've removed references and quotes, which we know will kind of inflate that artificially. But if everyone can kind of throw in what percentage they use, Michelle is saying 35%. Because at 85%, I would have just tossed it. I wouldn't even have,
Well, I look at every single one and it's like a case by case, because sometimes Authenticate recently has been really messed up and it's giving me really high numbers, but it's just at all, it's just counting all these silly. So I look at the report if it's above 25%, and then I will see it. And I'll leave a note for my editor-in-chief who makes the decisions, and he will either assign it to one of his editorial team or reject it offhand. But if it's a high, really high, then I'll put preprint and link and the URL in a note at the bottom so he can see that.
And which publisher are you with?
Wiley.
So yeah, my first instinct would be to find out what's going on with Authenticate. It shouldn't be giving you artificially high. 85 just sounds astronomical, but if it's the and I and phrases like that, clearly it's less of an issue. I'm seeing here Patricia Morrissey is 35%, Diane Dixon 20%, and she sends the report on to the author, gives them a chance to correct it. Lynn Reynolds 35 to 40%. Let's see, Megan, we don't use a specific percentage based on the highlight overlap. And obviously we know for things like methodology, some of those are kind of, unavoidable. So we give that a little bit of a pass. Laura is saying flag over 20%, 40% is a desk reject, yeah. So, and then Michelle provided her reuse policy, which is great. So basically what I'm hearing is anywhere from 20 to 40% raises a flag in our minds, makes us think, let me dive a little deeper, check into it. At 85%, even if your 85 is artificial and maybe it's 50, that's still high. So if your journal offices have not set a policy, it might be something to think about. We did that a few years ago, and it's helpful for staff to just kind of blanket no. If it's above this, we flag it or, investigate or bring it to the editor's attention or do a desk reject. It just streamlines things a little bit.
Phaedra, I was just going to comment that we don't use Authenticate. So to Helen's point about identifying content that's been submitted to preprint servers, we just ask the question. But going back to also what you posted about self-archiving, the other thought I had too, in terms of educating authors about sites like ResearchGate, is to put something perhaps in decision letters and their acceptance letters to, you know, some very small blurb, and then linking out maybe to something more extensive about what's permissible and what isn't.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Because,
that's
I mean, to your point about why is it important that we monitor this and police it to some extent, you made a point about usage and how those sites are detracting or diverting usage from our sites where we need that usage. I think that's really why it's so critically important. And plus, you need to, your other very valid point was version control and making sure that the content that is up there is the right content, especially in terms of patient safety.
Yeah, there's so many. I mean, again, the more we talk about this, I mean, the iterations are kind of endless, right? So, you know, we could assign someone to handle version control, assign someone to kind of handle, you know, the different issues, and it's impossible. It would take a village of all of us to do that. So, you know, we try and operate on the honor system. We hope the authors are doing that, but you know, 85% authenticate report shows that maybe that's not quite always the case. Yeah, are all of you, regarding the preprint, do all of you ask the authors in an acknowledgement letter, or are you, like we do, having a checkbox in Scholar One that says, you know, has it been previously published either anywhere or on a preprint server? Can you answer in the chat box? I'm just kind of curious how folks are handling that piece, because I think preprints aren't going away anytime soon. And again, it kind of, to Erin's point, it creates potential version control and even copyright issues. Checkbox in Manuscript Central, submission question regarding previous uploading to a preprint server. Okay, so most people are either using S1 or they are checking and authenticate. Okay. Okay, so here's a follow-up question. For anyone who allows preprints and you acknowledge it in some way that they've told you they're doing it, does that appear anywhere in the printed version of your article? So are you indicating that it previously was published on a preprint server? We don't do that, but you know, will we maybe come to a place where that's necessary? I'm seeing a lot of no's. We don't, we wouldn't. Gemma, why wouldn't you?
So I've actually been listening to this and my journals are published by, two of them are published by Routledge and one with OUP. Particularly with the Routledge ones, we've had inquiries from authors regarding preprints, and we've actually been quite a bit more supportive of them. I think because we've got that openness from the beginning, we wouldn't necessarily say that they would have to disclose that that it had been previously published elsewhere in terms of a preprint. You know, if it was the accepted PDF that is ultimately published on the website, absolutely, I agree that that's different and would be in breach of copyright and is a legal issue and it should be taken down. But actually, we've seemed to be quite supportive of authors who want to share their preprints elsewhere on sites like ResearchGate or academia. Obviously, we have rules about embargo periods and from experience, I am only talking about the authors who have been conscientious enough to check with us first. But in each of those cases, we've then gone on to say, this is what you can do. And as long as it's not that final version, then you're not in breach of copyright and it's okay. And I think one of the reasons that we do that is to acknowledge that some institutions, particularly with the journals that are trying to be international and engage or increase engagement with the global south, we know that a lot of those institutions aren't necessarily going to have access to the content via the website. And so there's partially an issue of inclusivity, but also the fact that if it does become more widely read, ultimately, if it then becomes more highly cited as a result, that is positive for the publisher. So we would always say to the authors to acknowledge on that preprint site the official version and provide a link to it on the publisher website, but we wouldn't do it the other way around.
That's so interesting. Thanks for sharing your perspective. I have a couple questions. So if you're allowing this, do you have language in your license forms that you ask them to sign at the point of publication, you know, pro or con, for or against uploading it to these kind of sites? Do you mention it at all, or do you preclude them from doing that, or tell them they're allowed to?
Honestly, I'm not sure. I don't recall actually seeing the license. It's something that was in place before I started, and it's something that we kind of leave to the publisher. And every time we've received an inquiry from an author along these lines of, is it okay to publish it here, here, or here? We always check with the publisher that the advice we're giving is accurate, and that, you know, we're operating within the accepted language and the accepted rules that they are setting. It's definitely led by the publisher, the policy on that.
So you made an excellent point about readership and citations. And I think that is one of the appeals of these sites, right? Being able to, you know, you mentioned a few things that are really on point, you know, in my mind. The access, right? The inclusivity of making that research more broadly available, which begets readership, which begets citation, which helps the journal. So, you know, I totally understand in theory how that would be a positive. And then access in developing countries, for example. So we know that institutional subscriptions and even personal subscriptions to our journals are really expensive, and we're not, you know, all able to afford it at the same threshold. So having sites like that where people can access the content and, you know, use it in their own research, you know, I do, if, you know, if I see one pro out of the ResearchGate model, it's being able to kind of foster that piece of it. And I think from an academic standpoint, I think that's where there's an attraction. Does anyone else want to comment on that or have thoughts?
So I just have a question about ResearchGate. So how are they clear about what authors can and can't do? I mean, I've never tried to upload anything there, so I don't have any sense for how clear they are in their policy and what is allowed versus, or what they state is allowed and not allowed.
So it's a great question, Erin. And basically, years ago, I think it was kind of the Wild West, and there were really no rules or regs. Now they have at two different touch points. If you were to try to upload something, a box will pop up that you have to check. And again, who reads it? We don't know, but it does say, do you have permission to upload this? And it doesn't ask you for an author, but it says something to the effect of, you know, do you realize you're uploading this? You know, do you have permission to do it? And basically I attest that, you know, this is okay. And again, you can attest, but you're still doing something that's not proper. So I think they make it really easy to break the rules, which benefits them. You know, it's all
So in theory, then are people or authors or whomever only supposed to be uploading content that is under a CC BY license and no one else holds the copyright? Or
so that's a great question. And I wanted to check my gut with my publisher Oxford, and they said that these same rules and regs apply to OA licenses. So CC BY, any of those iterations, you still shouldn't be making the PDF, the final, you know, edited version available, because again, you're taking the eyeballs off of your website, and all of that is detrimental. So it can be a link or it can be a stored PDF. You can put the abstract. I think there's language in most license firms, the first 200 or 300 words, something like that, or the title, and, you know, a little bit that says, contact me for the full content for an educational use kind of scenario. Yeah.
Thank you. That's really helpful to understand that.
Let's see here.
The other question quickly too I had, and Gemma made this point about sometimes preprints are uploaded to ResearchGate. Is it clear that that's a preprint?
Well, I don't, in my mind, no, I'm no, expert on any of this or legal authority, of course, but in my mind, it's not, because I have happened upon articles that published in my open access journal. I found the accepted manuscript Word doc watermark version up there a year later, and it was still up there. And in my journal, it's completely published in final form. So that's the version control issue. So if it can happen with that, I'm sure it can happen with preprints. And think about all of the kind of work that goes in from a preprint, where you're kind of putting it up there to be the first one to claim that, procedure, technique, whatever it is, versus once it goes through peer review. And I've managed journals where, the peer review cycle could be 3 years, just to sort of get it to that. So a lot can elapse between those. So I don't think it's obvious. And I think there's a lot of work that could be done here. And again, it's in our interest. It's not in ResearchGate's interest until someone brings, a lawsuit against them. And then all of a sudden, changes get made, but it's a lot.
Yeah, I was just thinking how, that's concerning, particularly concerning, because at least on a preprint server, you're getting a preprint. Whereas if you're happening upon this content on ResearchGate and it's not clear that it's a preprint, you might then use it in ways that, it doesn't indicate that this is not final, that these are, this hasn't been peer reviewed. And I guess I'm just would think that there could be negative consequences.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's sort of the big argument against preprints in general, is that, for the most part, they may not or are not peer reviewed. And, is it taking away from the, importance and significance and, gravitas of the peer review system? When anyone can just write anything and pop it into a preprint server and people read it. And then, like you said, they kind of go forward on that premise, but it hasn't been vetted. Let's see here. So Donna's sharing some polls here. I was asking editors, have you or your publisher had to issue takedown notices? 5 people, 63% said yes. If you answered yes, was your effort successful? 75% said yes. Do you feel it would require a full-time staff member to do it? Yes. I mean, it would be a lot. So for anyone who answered yes, that their publisher had to issue a takedown notice, I'd love to, we have just a couple minutes left here. If anyone is comfortable unmuting themselves and maybe kind of chatting about their experience, was it easy? Was it, litigious?
Well, Phaedra, this actually happened in our journal a few days ago. I don't know if it was an official takedown notice, but what happened was a paper got accepted, and I guess it hadn't gotten caught and authenticate that it had been posted on a preprint server. We double checked authenticate and it still wasn't coming up. So at the very end, we only found out because the author had mentioned some of the figures had been published previously, and when he said they'd been published previously, they'd been on a preprint server. So that's kind of how we found out about it. And we checked with the editor, and he said, or actually the author had offered to take the article off of the preprint server after we asked about the figures. And so we said, yes, the editor would like you to take that down, and he took it down, and it worked out pretty well.
Yeah, that's a great example, Laura. Thank you. I think that probably is a little bit shy of the full formal takedown, but I mean, I think that's a great example of where we worked with an author and we said, hey, this kind of doesn't work for us. Could you take it down? And it seemed like it ended up to be an amenable resolution there. But it makes me wonder. So for, let's see, for those of you who are, let's see, sorry, I just kind of lost my train of thought. All right, anyone else want to chime in? Sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought there. I was going to ask a question of Evelyn.
I can just quickly say that Elsevier did this on our behalf, and they just issued these takedown notices in batches. So there were just dozens, if not hundreds of them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it can be laborious. I mean, again, is that something that, I mean, thank God the publisher takes that on, because personally, I don't think my staff and I would want to be the one having to deal with that. And then even just the chasing cycle, I mean, it's hard enough for us to get people to review our manuscripts, let alone now we're chasing them to take things down. So, yeah.
I think that just goes back to the point of hopefully educating the ecosystem so that everyone bears some accountability and responsibility for managing this.
Yeah. I remember what I was going to ask, and it was to Laura's point about illustrations and figures being previously published. So in our journal, you know, it's an aesthetic surgery journal. So I'll try to not show something too graphic. So we have a lot of pre and post ops, and I wonder for anyone who is also, you know, publishing a lot of images. Let me see if I can find one here. These are not great examples. Sorry, just bear with me a second here. These are illustrations. So I guess the question is, do you allow images, illustrations, et cetera, that have been previously published in your journal? Our short reply is we don't like it. We want everything to be totally original. Could you add into the chat box whether, you know, you require it to be all original, whether or whether you're, you know, in a scenario where you allow reprinted figures from a competitive or another journal in your space or another space, or if you allow figures to be adapted. I'm just kind of curious where everyone falls in this regard. Fortunately, I can't find something that's not graphic enough to show this. Because our editor-in-chief in particular really wants everything to be original. Let's see here. So I'm seeing allow with permission from the copyright holder. That's standard. That makes sense. Allow reprinted figures or adapted figures. Reprinted with permission, adapted. Occasionally allow an adaptation. Reprinted, permissions obtained. Okay, great. Well, that's really helpful. I appreciate all of those answers. Allow with proper permission. Okay, so everyone seems to be pretty much on the same page. Well, this has been great, Erin and Donna and everyone who joined. Thank you so much for allowing me to chat with you today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Phaedra, for hosting this. I hope everyone found it to be informational and a good use of your time. And you know, if you're not an ISMTE member, consider joining and also consider hosting one of these in the future. So thank you.
Thanks. This was great.
Have a good afternoon or evening, wherever you all might be located.
Exactly. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.